There are basically 15 at least common causes of addiction. I want to scan over these quickly if we can. The first one is genetics. Everybody knows what genetics is. The truth of the matter is it is possible to inherit in your DNA a inclination or propensity towards addiction. In other words, some people are more likely to become addicted or become addicted to substances easier than other people do. And you can often tell this if you'll look at the genealogy. You'll see a lot of alcoholics in that family or drug problems in that family. And when you see that, it's like any other type of genetics, diseases and things, that should raise a flag that if I've had a father and a grandfather and a couple brothers over here and an aunt and uncle over here, then I might be more susceptible to becoming an addict or an alcoholic than the ordinary guy. And then, of course, we know that there are certain populations that are more, as a population, more apt to become addicted. For example, my wife is a Choctaw Indian. My boys are all half Choctaws, card carrying, the whole thing. And Indian people, she's from Oklahoma, the Indian people have in their DNA a genetic weakness towards addictions. And that's why you'll often see on the reservations a lot of the people are addicted to alcohol or drugs. It's not just something that Indian people do, it's something that it grabs them much sooner and much more firmly than it would the average guy. In other words, if you're one of those people groups, you're liable to only drink a couple beers and you're drunk, whereas an ordinary guy might take a six-pack or something. I don't know exactly what it takes. But not only that, the addiction starts much sooner in them. And that's true for a lot of the American native people. The Oriental people, particularly Chinese people, and I believe Koreans too fall in this category, have a real high tolerance of alcohol. It doesn't mean they don't have addicts or alcoholics and things of that nature. It just seems like less of them become addicted, but they can consume more. In other words, it takes more for them to actually become addicted. Which means it probably takes more for them to actually get the kind of satisfaction or high that they want too. So there's just a couple examples. The second leading cause of addiction would be mental health concerns, and we've already talked about that. We said that what often happens when someone has depression or anxiety, or if they're bipolar, they have a tendency to want to reach out for something that's available to them to treat their symptoms, to make them feel better. And so we call it self-medicating. And so that's where the mental health concerns come in. Environmental considerations. This deals with the place where you're brought up and the people that you live around, the people that you hang out with and spend time with. If you hang around with addicts, you're very, very much more likely to become one, okay? Because you are going to participate in their activities, probably, if you spend a lot of time. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33 says, bad manners corrupts good behavior, I think is what it says. Is that right? So, who you hang around with is going to affect you. So those are the environmental considerations. And then we have a lack of spiritual and religious connections. It is a statistical fact that people who are plugged into a church body, born-again Christians, or for that matter, the statistic says any type of religion, as long as they're plugged in and they're getting the support in a spiritual way, that they're less likely to become addicted, but those who are not are more likely to become addicted. And so there's another one. Then at number 5, difficulty coping with thoughts and feelings. If a person has a lot of, worry and fear, and they don't handle stress well, and perhaps they're going through a lot of problems in life, and it's really consuming them emotionally, they are more likely to reach out for something to relieve some of that, and they're more likely to eventually become addicted. Physical or sexual abuse. And the obvious reason, I think, would be the dealing with the guilt, the shame, the anger after the event has taken place or stopped. It's a horrifying thing. And so you want something to take away a pain that oftentimes won't go away, and that is the pain that I've been violated. I've been taken advantage of. Another one of those is a low tolerance for frustration, and that kind of ties in with the other, talking about emotional and people who don't deal with their thoughts well. But a low tolerance for frustration. Number 8 is low self-esteem. There are a lot of reasons this one would come in. A person with self-esteem issues is more likely to turn to drugs or alcohol to feel better about themselves. Sometimes to become part of the group. They will just go ahead and do it. I can remember when I was in about the 8th grade, standing in a circle, and of course back in our day, marijuana was, the one you snuck around and did it. And I remember standing in a circle one night, and this marijuana went around the circle and everybody smoked it, but I just handed it to the next guy. I didn't do it. But that pressure was on me, because I knew I'm the only guy here that's not doing it. But I went ahead and didn't do it anyway. So I know what peer pressure will do to you. So we said low self-esteem. Accessibility is a real big thing. The fact is that drugs are available. When they're available, people have a greater tendency to want to experiment with them, just to see. I know that sometimes innocent people will take a pain pill that's somebody else's pain pill because they got a pain tonight. You know what I'm saying? But with others that are really, they're not really doing it to relieve a legitimate pain. They're just trying to feel better or just see what it's like. Teenagers will do this, and it can lead to serious problems, full-blown addiction if not stopped. Substance itself. Some types of drugs like heroin, cocaine, and meth are highly addictive substances. It's absolutely, as we've already said, possible in some cases with some drugs to actually become addicted the first time that you experiment with that drug. Peer pressure is the next one, and we covered that pretty good a minute ago. Family behavior. Young people who don't have a strong attachment to their parents and siblings have a higher risk of becoming addicted to something one day in comparison to people with deep family attachments. And the obvious reason is that they're reaching out, searching for some place to connect, some place to feel better about themselves. And if they don't get it from the family, they may search outward and find it in a place that's not well. Loneliness. Again, if you begin to see this, the drugs really don't help people cope. It just makes them feel like they're coping. It makes them feel like they're, dealing with their issues. I dealt with enough people in my life and in counseling that have addictions that I came up with my own theory, and it was years before someone else actually said it, and I said, I've been thinking that all along. And that was this, that I noticed that people who start out and eventually become addicted with drugs and really become heavily addicted, it's almost like their maturity stops right there. I've noticed this. Have you ever counseled someone with drugs? And so I have counseled people like Bob, I mentioned, who were in their 40s and acted like 14. And Bob was really one of my first experiments of learning how to deal with people like that. And I asked Bob one time, I said, Bob, how old were you when you first realized that you had a drug problem? He said, 14. And I said, Bob, will it hurt your feelings if I tell you that sometimes you act like you're 14? He said, no, I know that's right. You see, what happens is that people turn to alcohol and drugs and things like that, pornography, gambling, sometimes to ease the pain or the frustration or the fear in their life. And instead of learning how to grow and mature and rationally deal with problems and work through them, they just basically drown them in some addiction. And so it stops their emotional and their mental progress. I don't mean that they don't go on and get a high school education or something, but what I mean is that emotionally their processing and their ability to deal with stress and problems, it just seems like they totally eliminate it and replace it with an addiction. And so when you're counseling sometimes these people, you almost feel like you're dealing with someone who's much younger than what they really are. Loneliness, we said, the age of the substance, when it was first consumed, we just talked about that. And then, of course, stress. So these are just some ideas that we can consider here. What are the possible complications? I want to try to move quickly on this one. Of course, obviously, there are all kinds of health issues. Drugs destroy your body. There's no question about that. They destroy relationships. They destroy all kinds of things in you. Another one of complications could be coma or unconsciousness or death. Diseases. People who inject drugs have a risk of developing HIV, AIDS, or other types of hepatitis, herpes, things of that nature. Some substances, including specific drugs or alcohol, can lead to more risky sexual behavior. In other words, people will take risk when they're high or when they're drunk that they wouldn't normally take if they were in their rational mind. Accidental injuries and death. We know that's true. How many people are killed? Someone just shared with me recently about, actually it was Brother Glenn who's here. He had, I believe it was an uncle who served in I believe it was Vietnam, and he went through his whole tour, made it home, landed at the airport, and was killed by a drunk driver on the way home after he survived war in battle. And he's taken out of this world by someone else who had an addiction, and this happens frequently. We know it does. Suicide. The risk of suicide is significantly higher for persons who are addicted or who have alcohol problems or addictions. Relationship problems. That goes without being said. Anybody that's ever been in a relationship with an addict can tell you that ain't the way to go. It's a very sad and frustrating and difficult situation. If you have a family member, a child, or a parent who has an addiction problem, you know the heartache and the pain. And it's because of people who are addicted to substances, or whether they be psychological or behavioral, it doesn't make any difference. It's painful. You suffer because of the relationship. Child neglect and abuse. How many times do we see on the news a story? There was one here in the last 6 months, or a couple, y'all might remember it, who they found that the parents were stoned, all the time. And the children, I don't remember if the children I don't remember what happened to the children, but it was something bad had happened to the children. And the parents were like, and so,
4 kids.
yeah.
Yes,
that was it. That's right.
The trial is coming up.
Okay.
This week. I think it comes up this week.
Right. That's the one I was trying to think about. So you see how bad and crazy, out of control it gets. Unemployment, poverty, and homelessness. Do you know that statistics say that the majority of people that are homeless on the streets, like in downtown Dallas or wherever, have mental disorders? And most of them have addictions, okay? For the reasons we've been talking about, because they try to medicate because they have, they're bipolar, they have anxiety, they have depression or something of that nature. But as a result, the process of it all caused them to literally lose everything that they have, and now they're living on a street and trying to steal here and there when they can to get a fix so that they can make it another day and another night. And then problems with the law goes without saying. You mess with illegal things, you're going to mess with the law. And so that's a real common thing. Our prisons are full of people that have drug-related charges connected to whatever charges they are also in there for. Remember, we said 90% of muggings and crimes, thefts like that, things are drug-related. So if there were no more drugs, there might not be near as many people in prison today, or stealing or robbing or mugging or raping or whatever. Yes, sir. A commissioner? Okay.
DA.
DA, okay.
Anyhow, he said that he's releasing people out of prison and jail that are there for drug problems because it costs us too money.
Uh-huh.
Money to keep them, and so they get early release.
Uh-huh.
That early release means that it's still going to be in the house and then back out to the same.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. The problem is that when you put people in jail with drug problems, you don't address their addiction. You just hope they can't get to what they want. And most of the time they can. Most of the time drugs are brought into the prison. They're, you know what I mean, they're there. So you basically, when that person's let out early or let out on time, they really haven't changed that much. They're just going back on the street to do what they did when they left.
In fact, it's a learning boot camp here because they got experts in there telling them how to do this and do that.
Uh-huh. That's exactly right.
It's like the university of different drug addictions trying to encourage each other what to do and how to do it.
Right. Yeah, it's a terrible situation. And that's why, and I hope you don't mind me saying this because it's true, the answer is Jesus. The answer is Jesus. The answer is the Word of God. The answer is a good Christian discipleship program. I'm going to try to move on over towards the behavioral and co-occurring disorders. In doing that, I would encourage you, if you haven't already read, to read through the whole manual here in Study Guide. I will say this quickly. The 10 most common addictions would be alcohol addiction is number 1, smoking is number 2, drug addiction is number 3, gambling is 4, food addiction, is number 5, video games, internet addiction, sex addiction, shopping, work addiction. Yes, people are addicted to work. Some are. Cell phone addiction, email addiction, eBay addiction. These are some of the new ones that we're on now. Online gambling addiction, internet addiction, cyber sex addiction, online pornography addiction, $2 billion industry. TV addiction, exercise addiction, and then prescription drugs. So that just gives you an overview of that. There's a section in here on how to deal with drugs. And the reason I ask you to read this is because you will want to know how to help someone. And that information's in here, okay? So we want to go now to what are co-occurring disorders. So I can't tell you what page it is because my pages are different, but at the top it says co-occurring disorders. 29? He said it's on 29, folks. So on page 29, let's break into this before we take our next break. So what are co-occurring disorders? This is people who have substance use disorders as well as mental health disorders are diagnosed as having co-occurring disorders or dual disorders. So if someone says, I have a dual disorder, they're telling you that they have co-occurring disorders. Co-occurring means they're happening together at the same time. Dual disorders means they're happening together at the same time. And when you hear these referred to, one of the disorders is always an addiction, okay? Then the other could be any of these that we're going to talk about. It is possible, it's very, very common because the two work so well together from a negative perspective. Substance abuse disorder. A substance use disorder includes alcohol or drug abuse, alcohol or drug dependence. So what's alcohol or drug abuse? This is diagnosed when the substance use interferes with functioning at work, at school, and in social relationships. It's also diagnosed when the substance use creates or worsens medical conditions, or when substance use occurs in dangerous situations. That's abuse. Okay, but notice the difference. Now we talk about dependence. Alcohol or drug dependence is more severe than alcohol or drug abuse. In addition to facing more negative consequences, people with dependence have failed in their attempts to abstain from or control their use of substances. In some cases, physiological dependence may also exist, which is indicated by the heightened tolerance, meaning that they need more to get the same effect, and withdrawal. Experiencing symptoms such as tremors or nausea when the substance use has stopped. So you see the difference. Substance abuse is this is the guy or the gal that spends every weekend on 2-day drunk, but they go back to work on Monday. And they do it because they think it's fun. In other words, I can't wait for Friday to get here. I party all weekend. And what they do is they drink themselves, or they shoot themselves, or pop pills until they're basically stoned all weekend. And they just consume drugs, and then usually wake up Monday morning and try to show up for work. This is also the guy that calls in once in a while, because it was what he calls a long weekend, okay, which means he had too much, okay? She had too much. This is a person who basically just abuses the drugs, but they can do fine if they want to go without it for a period of time. The person who is dependent upon the drug is addicted to the max. They can't live without it, and it begins to control their lives. So what are mental health disorders? Some of the most common mental health disorders found in chemically dependent people include mood and anxiety disorders. Even higher percentage of people with severe mental illness also have co-occurring substance and use disorders, called severe because of the severity and length of the episodes of the illness. These mental health disorders include schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder. These two last disorders are the most severe that we just talked about, the most severe, and they can include hallucinations or delusions, and are also sometimes called thought disorders. Okay? And we're going to talk about all these a little more in time. You see there now I give you a chart of disorders. It doesn't say chart of disorders, but you'll notice it says mood-related disorders. The mood-related disorders are just what they sound like. These people appear to be moody. Okay? All right? And that's because they are. Major depression. Everybody knows what depression looks like. Major depression is not just having a bad day on Monday. It's not the Monday blues. It's not just grandma passed away and I'm sad, and I've been sad, for a while here. No, that's called grief, okay? And that's normal to be a little bit depressed. That's not major depression. We'll talk about what it is shortly. Dysthymia. This is just a lower level of depression that's with you all the time. Okay? In other words, this is the person who always feels down. They're able to go to work. They're able to function in life. Their diagnosis is dysthymia. And that means that they're always feeling depressed, but they're not depressed to the point to where it's interfering with their life. They just aren't happy. Okay? And that's not normal, by the way. And then, of course, the next mood related disorder is bipolar. And bipolar we used to call manic depressive. Okay, in the day when we all grew up, or some of us. And it's just what it sounds like. It's extreme up, extreme down. Most of the time, bipolar, manic depressive is one or the other. It is possible to have what we call mixed, which means this person quickly shifts, frequently. And it's like 1 minute they're way down, the next minute they're, and you want to go, this dude's crazy, But in reality, they're what we call mixed. That's not as common as the others. There is no time set. Nothing says that it's 6 months depressed and then 6 months up, a manic. No, it can be a week and 6 months. A lot of people are that way. A lot of people will stay in one mood for a long period of time and you just have a short bout of the other, and then they're back over here. So in other words, sometimes things like this are hard to diagnose. And let me just go ahead and throw this out. Our position is to recognize these things and then refer them to someone who can help them, okay? This one course, you're not going to be qualified to help someone who has co-occurring disorders, but it will certainly help you, and you will help them and their family if you can say, you know what, I believe you're dealing with, a co-occurring disorder with your addiction. And I will help you, but you need professional help too. And in the very back of the manual, I wrote you just from off the top of my head, you'll see an outline back there that tells you how to handle appointments and how to counsel people. People always ask me, well, how do you really do this? Well, I put the really how I do it in there, okay? So you can use that as a guide. I also talked about how to refer, okay? And so if we don't get to that, that information is there for you. Severe mental illness. These are schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder, and we'll be talking about those. These are your people that hear voices. These are your people that might have delusions and things of that nature. And so these are more serious, and their behavior can be really erratic and really out there. And things. Sometimes their speech, they'll be talking, and they'll look at you like, why don't you understand what I'm saying? And it's like, dude, you're not speaking English. The truth is they don't realize that. What's coming out of their mouth is not what they think they're saying. And so, they have a mental health issue. And so anyway, we're going to talk about these, and we'll talk about the difference in the two, although they're very closely associated, okay? And then anxiety-related disorders. These are much more common in America today. It seems like even as the scripture talks about in Matthew 24, that in the last days, fear will grip the hearts of men. Remember that? It seems like today we have more anxiety-related disorders, which all anxiety is fear, okay? But it's spiritual, it's deep, and it becomes a mental health issue for people that don't get help and deal with it. So post-traumatic stress disorder, you hear a lot about that with our veterans. This applies to people, some of the most severe cases, and almost always the largest categories will be veterans and young ladies that have been raped, okay? PTSD is powerful in disrupting life and hurting people because of the wounds that people experience, and we'll talk about that. Panic disorder, and most of you know what that is, but panic disorder is just a sudden, out of nowhere, overwhelming fear, and you feel like I can't move, I can't breathe, I'm going to die, my heart's stopping. Panic disorder. That's getting more common all the time. Social anxiety, I talked about that earlier. This is difficulty with groups of people or crowds. It's difficulty being able to mingle and just build relationships. Generalized anxiety disorder, we normally refer to that as GAD. That's the initials for it, generalized anxiety disorder. And it basically is what it sounds like. It's just an overall anxiety and fear about just about everything, Worry, worry, worry. Obsessive compulsive disorder, we call that OCD. And OCD is becoming more common than it was in the past. All of these are, and I believe it's because the devil is on the rampage in the hour we're living, and he is attacking the minds and souls of people to try to destroy them. So OCD, you know what that is. This is excessive behavior. It can be in any area. It might be thoughts. They just think of the same thing. Sometimes you might be like me. I get a little OCD if I hear an old song I used to like, and it's like, and then all of a sudden I've been singing it in my mind for 8 hours. You know what I'm talking about? I had a pastor friend. He got everybody laughing one day. He said, and he's a great man of God, but he said, I'm going to have to confess to y'all. He said, I come up here today, and he said, I'm having trouble getting my mind on this. This has been about 15 or 20 years ago. On the service this morning, he said, on the radio when I was changing channels, he said, I heard an old country song, Baby's Got Her Blue Jeans On. And he said, I can't get it out of my mind. And he said, it's interfering with my thoughts. And he said, y'all got to forgive me. I got to deal with this. But you know how it is. You think of something, it might be a Christian song. I have this happen with worship songs. It's like I start out humming or thinking, before long it's driving me nuts. Not because it's not a good song, but because I can't get rid of it, Well, sometimes, not in that case, but in some kinds, people with OCD have that problem, okay? They just can't get over a thought. But for them, it's a continual thing. It's not like me or you that once in a blue moon we have that little issue there. It's the person who goes to go outside and they open the door and close it, and they open it and close it. Instead of going through the door and going on outside, they just keep opening and closing the door because something inside of them says, you got to do it again. You didn't do it right. You got to do it again. You didn't do it right. And they'll stand there sometimes, and for some of them might have a certain number. They have to do it 10 times. And after the 10th time, they go. Okay? And you say, that's nuts. Absolutely. They don't do it because they want to. This is the person who is washing their hands all the time. They wash their hands 100 times a day. They're just, we call them germophobics maybe, but it's like they can't help it. They can't help it. They can't help it. If you ever watched Seinfeld back in the day, not Seinfeld, Raymond, that show Raymond, I can't remember, but anyway, the guy Raymond was on there, and his brother was a police officer. And one of the shows, his brother, when he would eat, he would put the food on his fork, and he would touch it to his top of his lip, and then come down his mouth. And of course, the whole show was making fun of him. He'd go, in the show, but that's OCD. Of course, in that show, it was one episode and it's over with, okay? That's OCD. So it's just weird stuff like that. Me, I'm not OCD, but I cannot eat without a napkin. I have to have a napkin in my hand. It's just like, my wife will tell you, she brings me a napkin because if she don't, I go get one. I have to have a napkin. And I nearly rub my lips raw, wiping my face after every bite, and it drives me crazy. Here's another one with me. I am not OCD because OCD is severe, okay? But another thing is that when, since I've gotten to be an old man, I have to go to the restroom in the middle of the night. So I get up and go to the restroom, and every time I come back, I sleep on, I sleep on this side of the bed, if you can tell what that is. If you walk up to it this way. Well, I don't know why this is, but this has been for years. When I go to get in the bed, I will go to the bed and walk up to my side, which the bed's right here, and sometimes I start to go like this. And it's like everything in me says, ah! And I have to turn and get in from the right. Isn't that stupid? But, years ago I said, I ain't fighting this. I just correct it and do it. That's crazy, Now, I can make myself get in from the left. A person with OCD can't until they get help, and everything. So I believe it's breaking.